other forms of technology, and Audrey's experience in creating projects like that in Taiwan and thinking about it and their thoughts about it together have really really form a really profound both challenge and real opportunity for how we think about democracy, belonging, working together as citizens. That covers a lot of the areas that we do work on, and particularly thinking about co-governance and relationship between people and government that's more collaborative than adversarial. They'll be in conversation with Anne-Marie Slaughter, the president and CEO of New America, who's also thought long and deeply about these issues. Then we'll open it up.
And before we get started, I just wanted to take the opportunity to say Anne-Marie is someone who's very special to me. I'm Glen Weyl. We've known each other for more than 20 years. She has been a mentor through many, many different stages of my life. I just want to say happy birthday, Anne-Marie. This is Anne-Marie's birthday. We are so delighted to be spending, at least virtually, it with you a little bit, and so excited to exchange with you. 20 years after I walked into your office asking you to autograph a version of your book as my first gift to the woman who's now my wife. So thank you, Anne-Marie, for everything.
Okay, thank you, Glenn, and happy birthday, Anne-Marie. Before I turn it over to you, Anne-Marie, I want to thank Holly Rusin-Gilman, who's a senior fellow in our program, who's put this together and really also contributed a lot in thinking about co-governance and drawing on some of the work of Radical Exchange. Sarah Jacob, who's the program associate in our program, who's making all this happen. I also want to note this is co-sponsored by the Technology and Democracy set of programs at New America. So we really are trying to bridge how we think about democracy and how we think about technology. So with that, I'll just turn over to Anne-Marie to get the conversation and questions started. Thank you all.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to Glenn. As long as nobody sings, we're good. But it's a great thing for me to be able to do on my birthday. I want to just start by saying that, building on what Mark said about this book, and the book is called Plurality, The Future of Collaborative Technology and Democracy. And it's really an intellectual smorgasbord. It's a book that, as Mark said, you can read all the way through it. And if you do, then you immediately want to start going back to it because you're learning as you go. It's a book that you can dip in and out of very easily. And in fact, the beginning of the book sort of gives you a guide to, if you want the philosophical part, look here. If you want the practical dimension, look here. I am already using it as a reference book. When I'm writing, I dip into it and look for things. And so I really, we're going to have an hour of conversation here, a little less now, and that will just barely scratch the surface. But let me start, Audrey and Glenn, by asking you, how did you come to know one another? And then how did you come to write the book before we plunge into the book itself?
Sure. And really happy to be here at this event. In 2016, when I first became Taiwan's digital minister, I had this great honor to have this conversation with Vitalik Buterin, who at that time is working through the DAO fork, which is a co-governance challenge in the Ethereum community. So he went to Taipei and we met and we talked about digital democracy and so on. And later on, Glenn will write the book, Radical Markets, and also work with Vitalik on something that's also very important, which is the allocation of funding into the public goods in the Ethereum ecosystem. And so Vitalik just let me know that he's now working with Glenn on this quadratic funding, quadratic voting, and so on. And then I remember it was when I was in Taipei and Glenn was in New York, right? So we had a colleague kind of working as a mediator that brings Glenn together, and we video conferenced and we brought quadratic voting into the presidential hackathon, which is a very very important institution that brings the local innovations into digital public infrastructure in Taiwan. And we have Glen to thank for the quadratic voting method that surfaced the synergy between those projects.
And I then had the opportunity to meet Audrey in person in Germany. I had very much enjoyed working with her remotely. But I have to say, and I apologize to everyone who's watching this, being with her in person is a different experience. Anne-Marie, I don't know if you've had a chance to meet Audrey in person,
Yeah.
but it was really a moment that changed my life. She has a spiritual presence, and I really ended up from that point on devoting much of my life to giving as many leaders around the world that experience as possible. And while I must say that you were very kind about the book, for various reasons, because it's open source and so forth, it's been hard to really get the book distributed. But as we've toured the world, we've met world leaders, and everyone that we've met, it's led to major consequences because of just what it is like to be with Audrey. So I hope that you'll get a little glimpse of that now. But
That's great. So the first thing, I hear a number of things there, but one is just how global this is. I mean, it's born out of practical, although deeply innovative experience in Taiwan. And Audrey, well, I hope you'll tell us more about that. But very quickly connecting globally to efforts in the United States through radical exchange to increase direct participation in democracy. And those experiments are happening all over the place. But it's global, it's technological, but it's also physical and spiritual. So I have to go from there to ask you both just to explain plurality, and maybe particularly to explain why plurality and not pluralism, because at least often in the United States, you hear pluralism, pluralistic, meaning many. But why plurality, and what are you getting at with the concept of plurality, both maybe in English and in Mandarin?
I'll take the Mandarin part. I was the first digital minister of Taiwan, and in Taiwan, in Mandarin, 数位 means both digital but also plural. And so to be a Minister of Digital Affairs is also a Minister of Plurality. And because it is a technological position, it is not just about philosophical pluralism. It is not just about advancing the concept, but defining the technological trajectory so that it brings pluralism online and brings pluralism alive. When I was first the digital minister in 2016, I also wrote a job description which contained the word plurality. And it contrasts that with the technological singularity, which is this, vision of an AGI in the sky determining everything to everybody. I'd like to very quickly recite my job description just to set a scene. It goes like this. When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear that the singularity is near, let us always remember the plurality is here. So here, plurality means technology for collaboration across diversity.
Fabulous. The idea that plurality and digital go together as opposed to singularity it's striking, is as part of maybe a larger worldview, but also because so many of us, at least in the United States, my experience of digital is that it's binary. That it's ones and zeros. So when you say things go digital, you mean you are converting things into ones and zeros, and then they are then reconverted into everything. But it's a world, it's a sense of how we approach the world that's very different than the kind of welcoming spirit of plurality.
As the first non-binary minister in the world, Audrey certainly avoided that interpretation.
Mhm.
So Audrey, why were you made what did it mean to be the first digital minister in Taiwan? Why did you need a digital minister?
Yeah, in 2014, in Taiwan, the trust level between the citizens and the government were at a record low. The trust in the administration was at 9%. And the reason why, as we probably remember during the Arab Spring, the early days of the Occupy movements around the world, the social media makes it very easy to manufacture like counterpower to make sure that when people are outraged about something, everybody is outraged about the same thing. And people felt very close then. But just as it's easy to get counterpower going on social media, it's actually very difficult to get into something productive, something that is co-creative. And so in Taiwan, in March 2014, a lot of young people did not like the fact that the parliament was rushing through a trade deal with Beijing that would have opened up our 4G network, our publishing industry, and so on to Beijing and to the People's Republic of China. And so what we did is beyond just protesting. People occupied the parliament peacefully, thoroughly, non-violently for 3 weeks. But we call ourselves demonstrators, not protesters, because protesting is taking things down, right? It's against something that's counterpower. And demonstration means that you put in an alternate vision of how democracy can function. And so with 500,000 people on the street at its peak and many more online and with 20 NGOs, we set up deliberative democracy assemblies around the occupied parliament. Anybody can participate to talk about specific aspects of the trade deal. There's digital tools that you can enter your company name and so on and see exactly how the trade deal affects you. So digital truly is plural then, because then it integrates all the perspectives around this trade deal together. And every day we can read in the plenary what was agreed in the previous day and go into more detailed conversations until 3 weeks later, we have a set of very coherent demands that the Speaker of the Parliament then, Wang Jinping, said, okay, sounds good. So we'll just adopt it. And at the end of that year in 2014, all the mayoral candidates that promised this kind of deliberative, open participation got elected. Sometimes surprisingly to themselves. And all the mayoral candidates that did not promise that did not get elected. And so I was then tapped as a reverse mentor, as a young advisor to the cabinet in 2014. And I worked for 2 years with the Korea Public Service on using digital tools to listen broadly, not just broadcasting, but broad listening. And we resolved several issues like Uber, Airbnb, and so on in Taiwan. And so that experiment working with the civic technologists to set up digital listening tools eventually was ratified into an institutionalized post, which is the cabinet minister in charge of digital participation, open government, social innovation, and youth engagement. So that became a post. And so I became from a reverse mentor, like kind of like intern, into a full-time job when I turned 35 in 2016 as a digital minister.
So that is very striking because as you describe digital, it's not the focus on the technology, but the space, the space that it creates through the technology, but that the digital realm is a realm that is capable of lifting up many voices and integrating those voices in a way that our physical democracy finds very, very hard to do. We obviously work much more through through representation rather than direct participation. I'm going to ask now to play a video as we move into a conversation about democracy. And for all of you listening, I would also ask you to start putting your questions in. I will integrate them as we continue the conversation. So let's watch the video and think about your questions.
Across the world, democracy is on a decline.
Authoritarianism is on the rise.
Global freedom has eroded for the 18th consecutive year.
Audrey, Tang, what is your greatest hope for democracy across the globe?
That people see democracy as a social technology, something that people can construct together, that they can improve in the here and now. We can code up political systems.
The Sunflower Movement was a real turning point for Taiwan's democracy.
When the Sunflower Movement happened, I said to my colleague, I have to leave now. Democracy needs me. I brought a very long cable for internet connection. I live streamed through Twitter. Everybody saw it is possible for democracy to evolve, to come up with novel policies simply by asking the people, what should we do together? I was born with a heart defect, and one day I just fainted. I woke up in a hospital, and they told me the hole in my heart has grown. I could die. This awareness that everything can be reset tomorrow reminds me of Taiwanese democracy. We can't lose our democracy just with a couple missiles.
I think there's a lot that the world can learn from Taiwan. The US is running on a 250-year-old operating system. There is a strong desire to move beyond this and properly rethink from first principles. What would democracy in the 21st century actually look like?
We can make the government more open to the public. It'll be easier for people to access the data, to analyze it, transparency.
Audrey has created the opportunity to make Taiwan the most exciting constitutional democracy in the world.
I think it's a very critical moment. China really wants to invade Taiwan.
You're sitting on a place that is the flashpoint if there's going to be World War III. And yet there's calm in the eye of the hurricane. And that calm, I think, emanates from all that Audrey's done.
We can become co-creators of our democratic system, reconfiguring society in a way that is more transparent, more inclusive, more fair.
So that will be a film coming out soon, and you should watch for it, as well as looking for the book. You know, this emphasis on collaboration, on coming together, which is often not the way we think about democracy. Certainly in the United States right now, democracy is very much a battle between two camps. It is highly polarized. And even in parliamentary systems, as we are seeing in Germany, we saw in Britain over Brexit, and in other countries around the world, this sense that democracy is adversarial, not collaborative. I'd love to hear examples of where you're seeing collaborative governance through technology in Taiwan, but in other places in the world, and how that is helping to build trust. You heard Mark talk about collaborative governance or co-governance, which is something we at New America have been studying and trying to facilitate. But I'd love to hear about how it's not limited to Taiwan.
Yeah, so I think one of the recent examples that we have seen is in Japan. A few months ago, a reader of the book Plurality, Takahiro Ano-san, who is a 33-year-old science fiction writer, decided to run for the governor seat of Japan using this kind of collaborative listening tools. Now, he doesn't belong to any political party, but he was successfully crowdsourced his platform and rated by independent panels as the most interesting and also highest quality platform, because it used this kind of broad listening tools. Anyone could dial into a line and speak with the kind of vocal clone of Takahiro Ano, the Ano bot, and suggest new ideas to the Ano campaign or using a hashtag and so on. But the great thing is that the bridge potential between those very different statements of policy, suggestions, life experience, and so on are visualized in real time using a tool called Talk to the City. You can literally see like 150,000 different ideas, different statements, and how the nuanced, more eclectic bridging lines connect them together. And then that represents, like, despite the different views across generations, across different ideologies, and so on, what are kind of the bridge-making statements that then Ano-san takes as a revised version of his platform, and then a VTuber version of himself just re-records that platform, and you can literally see it in real time in his YouTube live stream. So he got to the 5th place, getting like 3% of votes in a very short time frame, and it really made everyone in Japan that we met, including the governor who won the re-election, Koike-san, and they're like, yeah, this is one way to depolarize people, because if people see in this group picture that actually for most of the needs of the Tokyo citizens, people do agree with most of each other on most of the things, most of the time, most of their neighbors, then we're not captured by the antisocial corner of social media, which tend to extremify, right, polarize people's opinions by making those voices go viral. So making sure that we highlight the bridge potential of those sentiments and statements, that is the core of plurality. I don't know if Glen would like to chime in.
No, that's good.
We're good.
Do you want to offer any, though, examples from the US?
Using a different set of technologies in a different time period, the Colorado State Legislature used quadratic voting first in the Democratic Party and then in the Republican Party as a way for members to set their internal party agenda about what discretionary projects they wanted to use. And, you know, the great thing about quadratic voting, it's a system that lets you show how strongly you feel about different issues, is that it means that everyone feels a part of the eventual allocation that's made. Because even if your favorite project doesn't get in, there's a project that you somewhat supported, and it's more likely to get in the more you put on it. So rather than, oh, I won or I didn't win, it's, you know, which of the things that I how much supported got where in the allocation, you know, of things, which is, of course, how any like reasonable deliberative process should work. But of course, that's hard to do at scale. And, you know, quadratic voting, all these are tools to create that sense of closeness and collaboration and depth of working together, scale to broader sets of communities, things that everybody knows from tribes to town halls is a key feature of how people, you know, form relationships. But if we can do that broader using these tools, then, you know, we really manifest this idea of deeper and broader collaboration through technology.
Yeah, if I may take just a couple of minutes to demonstrate how quadratic voting works. So every year in Taiwan, you see like 200 presidential hackathon ideas. It could be monitoring air quality and water quality collaboratively. It could be telehealth. It could be things that uplifts a community and on the smaller scale. And people are asked to vote on them. But as you know, for many internet voting, if you just offer 1 vote per person, they go online and vote for their favorite project. They don't even look at the other projects. But because of quadratic voting, people go to the presidential hackathon website. They get 99 credits, 99 voices credits, and then they vote. And they find very quickly, 1 vote costs 1 voice credit, 2 votes 4 credits, 3 votes 9 credits, and so on. So it's quadratic. And with 99 points, you can only vote 9 votes, which is 81, and you cannot vote 10, which would cost 100, right? So with 9 votes going to your favorite project, you still have 18 left. So people are motivated to look at another project to vote for 4, that costs 16, and they still have 2 points left. And so people are motivated to look at least 4 different projects to find a synergy. And sometimes they take the original 9 back because it's too expensive. And so by the time we get to the top 20, everybody feel they have won. because they have voted for at least one of those top 20. And then we, the curators, can see what the top 20 have in common with the other 200 that didn't make the cut, because it shows a complete group picture of how synergetic those 20 has with the rest. And so we can reorganize and develop infrastructure that benefits them together. So it is a much better way compared to one vote per person to show the group that we have much more in common, much more overlapping than we would otherwise think of ourselves.
I think that is a really helpful description. And as I was listening to you before, I was thinking, the idea of plurality emphasizes the plurality of our own natures, right? That we can want something, we can want something in the workspace, in the government space. We are often internally contradictory people. We are not single entities or even dual entities. So this space and the technology unlocks us as beings. It's also
Henry, let me say one word
Yes.
about that, which is I think these tools are just as important for individuals as they are for social groups for this reason. I think a big part of the reason why we're polarized beyond just the social media landscape is that it's like really hard to deal with the complexity of who we are in this world. And it's very isolating because, you might be deeply conservative Christian and at the same time have attraction to members of the same sex and be in a workplace that might be hostile to both of those things and like just really have a hard time figuring out who you are. And so it's like really tempting, not because you actually feel overwhelming sympathy for like one political tribe or another, but just because you like want to have a set of people who you're able to say like, these are my people. And so a big part of this, I think, is just giving people the tools to like make sense of themselves and to understand who they are. And it's genuinely complicated to do that. And like, I don't think our social media environment does a great job of that. I actually think it kind of heightens that confusion and therefore drives you into a tribe. And if instead you like have ways that actually help people appreciate the nuances of their own identity and work through the challenges of that, then you kind of liberate people to have a bit more like patience with others in their diversity because they keep sense of their own self, of their own internal diversity, but also a sense of integrity through that all.
In doing that, undoing preconceptions and stereotypes of others. In other words, being more able to see the plurality of others. Audrey, so as you describe this, and as we have seen it in a number of places in Latin America, in the United States, in Asia, of things like participatory budgeting, where people come together and make collective choices. But as I sort of see this rich democracy in Taiwan among the people, but when I think about that, even in Taiwan, certainly in the United States, I see all that richness and diversity and complexity running up against the hard wall of the bureaucracy. Right, where when I was in government, we always used to laugh that there were two answers to anything new. One was it'll never work, and the second was, and we've already tried it. And it's how you got past never worked to trying it to get to we've already tried it was never clear. But how did the Taiwanese bureaucracy come to accept this? Is it a function of crisis?
I think it is because a function of the emerging crisis, of course, of legitimacy, because when your approval rate is at 9%, anything that improves that 9% is quite welcome, because literally in 2014, anything the government has, the policies and so on, people are automatically against that. And the idea that to win trust, you have to first give trust. To give no trust is to get no trust. So some way to radically trust the people, to come up with their shared values, shared feelings on genuinely emerging problems like the Uber problem, there's no single Korea public servant at a time in either the Ministry of Transportation or Economy or Finance said, okay, I know this, I've got this, I know how to fix that. No, because all around the world, people are facing the same challenge that they have not sorted into silos before. And so because that we tackle those emerging challenges first, and we show the Korea public service that it lowers their risk while increasing the signal, and so therefore save their time toward a good policy. They don't feel like it's taking their jobs away, but rather equipping them with a better radar of sorts. And also in the presidential hackathon, we designed such that each winning team in the top 20 need to have at least one public servant, one private sector person, and one social sector person. So it encourages cross-sectoral pollination. And if the junior like section chief and so on level of public servant have a great idea that they don't have the endorsement or budget of their director general or their department head, they can try it out at that presidential hackathon. If it doesn't work, it didn't work, then they're like, oh, we're just participating in a hackathon, right? It's the NGO's idea. It is the private sector startups idea. But if it does work, then we give them this trophy. The trophy, the president will present to them a micro projector that if you turn it on, it projects the image, the video of the president giving you the trophy. So it's very meta, it describes itself. And with it, the promise that whatever you tried in a local district or a local town will become the digital public infrastructure in the next fiscal year. And so the idea that your career can be just uplifted by having this small sandbox, small experiment into national policy, this is what makes a career public servant really proud. So reducing their risk while increasing their sense of credit, their sense of achievement, that has been a winning formula.
Oh, that's wonderful. That I remember at one point, I was in a meeting in the State Department and somebody suggested that we should give awards for failure to encourage people to take risks. But of course, somebody else said, yes, that will look wonderful on the front page of the Washington Post. You know, the government is now handing out failure rewards. But I take your point that it lowers the risks and also gives public servants who are in the government the sense that they can, of course, participate also as citizens, not
That's
just
right.
in their
Yes, exactly.
in their job. So that's very helpful. You mentioned the private sector. So say more about the role, if you would, of the private sector. Obviously, civil society are the folks you'd expect to want to be participating, but not so much the private sector. At least in many democracies, they lobby.
Yeah, definitely. And they lobby in Taiwan too. And I think the great thing about this, like Polis or the other platforms that we have tried, is that the private sector can be part of the conversation, but they cannot capture the conversation because, for example, in the Uber case, Uber really tried very hard to lobby that we open up the taxis and so on, just as in other parts of the world. But because we used a wiki survey, a survey that is not preordained by the minister or by the posters, but rather we simply ask everybody who have taken Uber or care about Uber or care about taxi, how do you feel about the Uber situation? And so while Uber and later Airbnb did mobilize all its members to vote on these platforms, you cannot hit the reply button because there's no reply button in the Polis platform. So you see a fellow citizen's sentiment like insurance is important, not undercutting existing meter is important, but all you can do is to upvote and downvote that sentiment. And you see yourself in avatar moving toward the people who feel similarly into clusters, but there's no reply button, so there's no room for troll to grow. There's no way to capture the conversation by mobilizing hate or outrage and so on. And by the end of the 3 weeks, actually, most people do agree on a set of very coherent demands. And then we invite Uber to the table, taxis to the table, and checking with them whether you're okay with that, whether you can live with it. And because we show that it's not just a majority vote, but of all the clusters, people who care about taxi, Uber, rural development, and so on, you have to win the supermajority from all of these different clusters in order for the agenda to be lifted as a bridging statement to the multi-stakeholder conversation table. So while the private sector can contribute arguments, can contribute analysis and so on, they have to really reach the other side and also convince the other groups as well. So again, a simple change in mechanism design really motivated private sector to lobby in a very different way. They have to now lobby across the groups and have to convince the minorities, the people who did not share an agreement with them. And so later on, we use the same method to work on, for example, the social media, deepfakes, crypto scams, and things like that. And again, Facebook, YouTube, and so on participated in the conversation constructively because they knew they have to reach out to the people who don't usually agree with them in order for their agenda to count.
I mean, just listening to you, I feel my hope rising. I mean, the idea of voting, of designing it so that you have to have bridging statements brings me to actually to a question already from our audience, because our social media totally rewards polarizing statements, right? The more outrageous you can be, the more followers, as opposed to if you want to try to find it's something on both sides. You want a bridge. You are boring and moderate. One of the questions from the audience is focused exactly on U.S. Social media and pointing out that our social media companies are already on partisan lines. I mean, the X now very much on the right, Meta or Zoom, in different is sort of come into the conversation in different places. I think the question is, how do you navigate the partisanship that is built into our social technology on the part of the companies and on the part of the technology itself?
That's a great question. So right now there is an attempt to change our social media that's really gaining quite a lot of momentum. Something called Project Liberty, and there are actually some other bids as well, are coalescing around the idea of what I call pro-social media. I'm working on a paper and a variety of means of communication about exactly what that means. But it draws greatly on the Taiwanese experience, these bridging statements, which is no longer a marginal thing. It's being used as the engine for fact-checking on X right now, something called Community Notes. It's being used now in YouTube as their fact-checking engine, but it's not being used sufficiently to actually serve content. And it's our view that it actually would be better for everyone in the ecosystem if it did that more. Because the reality is that social media uses social signals, it uses the social graph and the social relationships to figure out what content to serve, but it does it in sort of the way that a clear cutter uses a forest. It cuts down those social connections and uses them, but it doesn't regenerate them so that it can sustainably harvest that wood or harvest the fruit of those trees. And we don't believe that's necessary. And we believe that in the same way that sustainable agriculture generates more total production in the long term, we can generate more total social information, more total revenue for advertisers by actually regenerating the social fabric that is the foundation of these platforms. And it's kind of too much to go into exactly how that would work here, but I welcome further exchange about that.
But if you are on X.com, feel free to join the community notes community because the notes that end up getting attached to those viral posts are exactly the notes that speak to the polarized both sides. So if something that is only considered as helpful by one side, then it doesn't get featured. And so in order to reach out, you will have to think in a kind of both left wing and right wing, like a racist plane or something kind of way. And just thinking this way, while working through this stereoscopic vision, I think by itself is quite inoculating against the party polarization.
That's very encouraging. And I did not know about community notes. I will absolutely check it. But notion that we really can simply change the incentives. So you are still accepting that human beings are often competitive, right? That we want to be validated, but we're changing the terms of the validation. I want to, we've got again a number of great questions. Here's one that then moves beyond the sort of domestic policy government and says, how do you use plurality to engage beyond zero-sum thinking, which is built into the plurality framework, in foreign policy, which I think is a particularly important, obviously, the US-China divide, the U.S.-Russia divide, it's not autocracies versus democracies, but there are definitely some rogue players in the international system. So it's a very polarized setting, and again, with often the vision of only a couple of powers. So how do we move beyond zero-sum thinking?
So I'm going to give two very, very, very different types of examples. The first one, which I learned about this summer, is NATO. So if you want to ask what is a mode of international cooperation that is an alternative to both protectionism and to the simplistic neoliberal free trade, I would say it's international military alliances, actually. That international military alliances could be a model for much else that we do in terms of international cooperation. Why is that? What does NATO actually do with most of its time? It doesn't actually do primarily joint operations. It doesn't do collective defense because, of course, that has never been invoked. What it actually does is interoperability and minimum levels of common investment. So, neoliberal free trade is all about bring down the barriers, bring down the subsidies, and allow free competition. The logic of international military alliance is actually the opposite. Minimum levels of common investment that are interoperable across the different components. And those are actually the foundations of the way that the original internet was built up. That different organizations agreed to make common investments and to negotiate interoperability between those investments. And I think that if we take that actually as a broad paradigm for an alternative to both protectionism and free trade, we might be in a much better place. Second, completely opposite type of example, and this one's really kind of poetic, but it comes from plurality type thinking. So the jurisdiction that Audrey was minister of has two names. Some people call it Taiwan. Some people call it Republic of China. And in traditional Mandarin, in which the Republic of China originates from, that name is Zhonghua Mingguo, which means between cultures, which is how China is referred to in Chinese. Citizen republic or citizen nation. And so, and Taiwan, in the traditional Taiwan people's language, means like meeting place or place of convergence. And so Audrey interprets these as actually being the same thing in two different languages. So it's the Transcultural Republic of Citizens. It's a place of meeting of different cultures. So that's a semiotic, poetic, thing, but it gives you a way of thinking that maybe there doesn't need to be a binary of China or Taiwan. Maybe these visions of what this is can coexist with each other. And that's just in a semiotic space, but we also have thoughts about what things like that could mean in structures of government, in consociational systems, and so forth.
Right. I need to think hard about that vision of NATO, but it's true that a huge amount of the time spent in NATO, also in the European Union, is simply aligning things, interoperability, but aligning views, not harmony necessarily. I mean, not all agreed, but plurality in that sense. Another question that I think it actually ties together several questions. A question is, what does deliberation look like in the age of AI? And that builds on a question I was going to ask, that Taiwan has 23.5 million people, roughly. And of course, the US has 320. How do you think about, so how do you think about scaling to much bigger nations? And is AI a key part of being able to do plurality of governance, co-governance, collaborative governance at scale?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the bridge making algorithm is a early AI. It is not deep learning. It's not generative AI. It was just principal component analysis, k-means clustering, but it was AI, good old-fashioned AI. That then enabled us to see the unlikely common ground with the people who have vastly different ideas and opinions. So from the very beginning, we used AI, if not the latest Gen AI, to make sure that it can scale and it kind of auto-facilitates itself. And just this year, we've had what we call alignment assembly, setting the boundaries of how AI's integration to the society should look like. And so using AI to enhance deliberation, to deliberate about the place of AI in the society, that's an alignment assembly. And so in Taiwan, we send SMS text messages to 200,000 random citizens, and asking again, how do you feel about deepfakes? How do you feel about information integrity in online, like crypto scams and things like that? And people share their ideas. And then we ask people, would you like to spend a long afternoon, almost an entire day, to have an online, like Zoom-like conversation with 9 fellow citizens? And we chose stratified random sample of 450 people that represents the statistic microcosm of Taiwanese society. And so in 45 different rooms of 10 people each, the room itself facilitates. So that's another use of AI. It shows an ongoing transcript. It nudges people who are quiet to speak up more. You can disrupt each other, but only for 5 seconds, and so on. And so it shows this ongoing group picture, and it weaves together on the back end the idea, the aha moment, the ooh moment in each rooms, and weaves them together into more nuanced policy ideas, proposals. And then we read them back at the plenary. For example, there's an idea that says, if Elon Musk is showing a kind of crypto scam recommendation, and the social media like Facebook showing that advertisement did not secure a digital signature, a know your customer signature from Elon Musk, then that's probably fake. But the social media company, if they do not secure the signature, somebody get conned for $1 million, then that social media needs to be liable for that $1 million. So that is a weaving together of like 3 different ideas, and it is already law in Taiwan. It is already functioning. And so have a conversation in March, have a multi-stakeholder idea brainstorming of how to realize that in May, and finally now in September being signed into law. And Taiwan is one of the first jurisdictions that has the full liability that requires the digital signature of all the crypto scam and so on. And it's really working. It's almost all gone now on Facebook and YouTube. And so to your question, I think these ideas do work. And in US, maybe we can start in a state level. There are many states that are the same order of magnitude of population in Taiwan. And in fact, I believe like Best Novak in New Jersey is already trying out many of those same idea. And in fact, after this call, I'm going to hop on a call with another state government that want to do something like this. And so we're seeing much more uptake in the state level in the US. Maybe it's a good thing, right? Then you have like 50 or so different ways of doing things, and then you can compare and choose which one to scale on the federal level.
Now that is marvelous. And again, it goes back to the point that you made at the outset, that democracy is social technology. Democracy is a technology for how to govern ourselves, and the design is critical in terms of what it brings out, what dimension of our nature it brings out, how it structures our being together, how it equalizes voices. And I think particularly how it raises voices that are otherwise marginalized. So again, when you think on social media, who is the most likely to be silenced? It's the people who have a hard time in any setting, who then are just very easily excluded. The next question goes to, I think, a deeper point, which is I've just said democracy is social technology. We've been talking a lot about how digital technology, the modern technology we all think of when we think about technology, and how that serves plurality. But the question is, how would you approach plurality from a non-technological point of view?
Glenn, would you like to take this one? Because to me, even like voting on paper is technology. It is just not digital technology. A lot of the non-zero-sum facilitation, like Polis and so on, have its counterparts in open space technology, in dynamic facilitation, in the ORID method, the focused conversation. So all of these digital technologies have their analog counterparts. And a lot of the work that we do is not mandating that people go to those digital places. But if people do prefer an analog way of a conversation and so on, fully capture it and amplify their voice so that then a very different group in a very different city and so on can resonate between them. That doesn't mean that these initial conversations need to be on digital spaces. And so I think digital, again, is plural, and there are a plurality of modalities that we can come together and have a conversation. And as long as there's a bridge that connects one conversation to the next conversation, then I think we're set. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess all I'd add is there is no such thing as democracy on a large scale without some form of technology. There's not even really such a thing as democracy on a small scale without some form of technology, because of course language is one of the earliest and most important human technologies. It did not exist, as far as we know, for the earliest humans. It was created in many places at different times. Writing was created, printing was created, and it is pretty widely understood that without various of those innovations, it would have been impossible to have various forms of representative or democratic government at beyond very small scales. Most of the founders believed that prior to the printing press, it was not possible to have democracy beyond a city-state scale, and there's no example that we're aware of that existing. It's not just scale that technology permits, it's also intimacy. People cannot share their subjective internal experience. Brain-computer interfaces might make that possible. Technology is not like us going on Zoom or one thing. It's a whole range of ways that we evolve our capacity to relate to each other, harnessing the capabilities that we have.
That takes us to what may be our last question, although we may have time for one more. So we've seen how this operates at 23 million people. We can imagine how it can grow. How do we know, or how have you, I guess, check this in Taiwan? How do we know that people really do feel seen and involved and engaged, that this was real, that this was not the government trying to do something and kind of getting it people washed?
Yeah, sure. There are objective international measurements like the ICCS, the International Civics and Citizen Standard Measurement, where 15-year-olds around the world are asked a series of questions of how they feel already as a citizen, as a participatory member of the society, even before they turn 18. And in the 2022 2022, the latest edition, the Taiwanese 15-year-olds are simply the top one in the world when it comes to the feeling of like a citizen in the society. And we're also ranked as the top democracy in Asia by the Democracy Index in Economist, and also the most free according to Freedom House, Freedom on the Net, and the Human Index, and many things. So there are objective measures. But more importantly, also people just participate so much more if you make sure that they can get like 5,000 signatures even before they turn 18. They can set a national agenda, and sometimes we meet those petitioners and they say, you know, it's a civics class assignment. It is part of their high school education that they just start a movement online using those deliberative democratic tools and so on. So I think the point is not just about the mutual trust, which did grow from 9% to 60, at most 70% in the past few years, but rather like the subjective feeling of you asking any 15-year-olds, and they're like, yeah, of course, democracy is a thing. And then they don't feel that, you know, it's the adults, I have to wait until I'm 18 and so on. They feel that they're a citizen in the here and now.
I think another way you can tell that sort of thing is the dramatic decline in polarization in Taiwan, and now a second least polarized country in the world. That polarization is especially low among young people. You know, you think of the image of young people here, the challenges that we've had on campuses. But I think a lot of that comes from the fact that those people have not been in the situation of having to work with people across difference to pass a law or to like do something hard. When you haven't had to take that kind of responsibility, it's easy to focus on performance rather than, and you know, it's understandable because they haven't had that ability to be heard. But when you've actually had to get those things done, it's different. And because that's a part of the educational system in Taiwan, people are unpolarized because they feel empowered.
I think that's a great note on which to end. And exactly, I think so many of the young people in the United States are so angry and often so polarized precisely because they do not feel that they have agency. So that there's all the frustrations at the injustice that they are witnessing, or the violence, or whatever is a source of pain without the agency to actually do something about it, which creates all sorts of negative effects. Well, I want to thank you both, and thank our New America colleagues in the political reform program who put this on, and Mark and Sarah and Holly and Carly. I want to just end by saying that this book is a book about democracy. That's in the subtitle, this book, Plurality. It's also a book about humanity and about diversity, and maybe above all, about possibility. It's a book of hope. So thank you both. It's been a wonderful conversation, and thank you to our wonderful audience who really provided, in a participatory way, lots of great questions. Thanks
Thank
all.
you. Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.